The shy rancher's life changes forever when an Apache woman rides into his world. Eli Thompson lived a life that many would call quiet, almost too quiet. He had spent his entire 33 years on the same small ranch, tucked away in the wide-open plains of the American Southwest. The land stretched for miles, with golden grass swaying in the gentle wind, dotted here and there by rocky outcrops and clusters of hardy trees. From a distance, it looked like the perfect kind of freedom, a place where a man could lose himself in the endless horizon. But for Eli, the freedom felt lonely, like a vast emptiness pressing against him every day. Eli had always been a shy man. Even as a boy, he preferred the company of animals to people. While other children in the nearby town laughed and played games, Eli would wander to the edge of the creek, watching the fish dart under the water or listening to the soft rustle of leaves. He had an easy understanding of animals, a patience and gentleness that seemed almost unnatural. The cows would come to him without fear, the horses nickered when they saw him approach, and even the wild rabbits and birds seemed to recognize him as part of the land. People sometimes noticed this, and they admired him quietly, though they rarely approached him. Eli didn't mind. He had never felt that he truly belonged in the crowded, noisy world of towns and people. The days on the ranch followed a rhythm that Eli had never wanted to change. He rose before the sun, the first faint light painting the sky in pinks and oranges, and walked out to the barn to feed the animals. The scent of hay and warm livestock filled the air, a comfort he had grown to depend on. He would check each cow, making sure none were sick or injured, and then turn his attention to the horses, brushing their coats until they shone. After breakfast, usually bread and some coffee, he would ride out across the land, inspecting fences and checking on the scattered herds of cattle. It was simple work, but it kept him busy and gave him a purpose that he had never felt he needed anyone to share. Evenings were the hardest. After the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, Eli would sit by the fireplace in his small cabin, a modest home with wooden floors, a stone hearth, and windows that framed the wide prairie. The fire crackled, casting shadows across the room, and Eli would eat a simple meal of stew or roasted meat, sometimes thinking about his life but mostly letting the quiet surround him. He would read from old books he had collected over the years, stories of explorers, pioneers, and the distant cities he had never visited. They gave him a sense of connection to the world, though he had never been tempted to step far beyond the land he called home. Sometimes he would hear the distant sounds of the town, a wagon's wheels creaking along the dusty roads, laughter echoing faintly from the saloon or the church bells on Sunday mornings. He knew people would smile and wave if he went into town, but he could never find the courage to join in their lives. He had tried once or twice in his youth, but the noise, the crowd, the way people seemed to look past him and into some invisible space he couldn't reach, had driven him back to the ranch. Here, with the wind in his hair and the soft lowing of his cattle around him, he felt he belonged. The town had its own stories about Eli Thompson. Some said he was a genius with animals, that he could calm a frightened horse with a single word. Others whispered that he was strange, too quiet, too withdrawn, almost like a shadow that moved among the people without touching them. Eli never cared. He had learned long ago that the world would make its judgments, but he could choose how much to let them matter. Most of the time, he let it matter very little. He found comfort in routines, in the predictable world of the ranch, in the knowledge that if he did his work carefully, everything would remain as it should be. Yet even in this quiet life, there was a sense that something was missing. Eli had friends among the animals, neighbors he respected, and skills that few could match, but there were moments, especially at night when the sky was a vast sea of stars, when he felt a sharp, aching emptiness. It wasn't just loneliness, it was a quiet longing for something he couldn't name. He had never been one for dreams of wealth or fame, and he never felt the need for excitement or adventure. But he longed, in a subtle and deep way, for connection, for a presence that could stand beside him in the quiet, not to fill it with noise, but to make it richer, warmer, and alive in a different way. His ranch, though small, had been built from the ground up. He remembered the day he inherited the land from his father, a man who had loved the prairie but had been too rough, too impatient, to understand Eli's gentle nature. Eli had worked tirelessly for years, repairing old fences, planting small gardens, and gradually making the place a home. There was satisfaction in the work, a deep, calming sense of accomplishment in shaping the land with one's own hands. But the quiet days, the endless repetition, also amplified the feeling that life could be more, that perhaps the world beyond the hills held stories that he would never hear. Eli's neighbors were few but dependable. There was old Mr. Reynolds, who lived several miles down the road, a widower who loved to share stories of the past. He often stopped by, leaning on his cane, and they would sit on the porch for an hour, talking quietly about cattle, weather, or old legends of the land. There was Sarah, a young woman who worked in the general store in town, who occasionally delivered supplies and smiled kindly at him. These interactions were brief, careful, and always left Eli feeling both comforted and awkward. He wasn't bad with people, he just didn't know how to weave them into the tapestry of his life without feeling exposed. Seasons changed slowly on the ranch. Spring brought new life. Calves struggling to stand in the grass, foals prancing beside their mothers, and the tender shoots of green poking through the earth. Summer was hot and dusty, with long rides under the blazing sun, and nights when the fireflies danced across the prairie. Autumn painted the land in rich colors of amber and gold, and winter blanketed everything in a hush of snow and frost, quieting even the calls of birds. Eli had learned to move with the rhythm of nature, to anticipate the weather, to respect the cycles of life. He knew the land as one knows a friend's face, intimately and deeply. One spring morning, as he rode across the eastern pasture checking the fences, Eli noticed something unusual on the horizon. At first, he thought it was a rider from the town, perhaps someone lost or seeking help. But as he got closer, he saw that the figure moved with a grace he had never seen. It was a woman, riding a horse that seemed as wild and proud as she was. Her presence was striking, almost magnetic, cutting across the familiar landscape in a way that made Eli's heart beat a little faster. He had never been so aware of another person in his life, and the realization left him both nervous and intrigued. The woman was alone, her movements careful but confident. She wore simple clothing, yet it suited her perfectly, allowing her to move with ease across the rough terrain. Eli watched quietly from a distance, unsure whether to approach or retreat. His instincts told him caution, but his curiosity won over. There was something about her, a quiet strength, a sense of independence that Eli could not ignore. He felt in that moment the stirrings of a life that was about to shift in ways he had never imagined. And so, the quiet life of Eli Thompson, the shy rancher who had spent decades in the comforting embrace of solitude, began to teeter on the edge of change. The wide-open plains, once a sanctuary of peace and routine, now seemed to hold possibilities he had never allowed himself to imagine. The wind whispered across the grass, as if carrying secrets from afar, and Eli, usually so calm and composed, felt a spark of anticipation. Something new was coming, something that could reshape the very fabric of his world. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to wonder what it might be. Eli could hardly believe what he was seeing. The woman on the horse was unlike anyone he had ever encountered. She moved across the land with a quiet confidence, the kind that made every step seem deliberate, purposeful, and in perfect harmony with the prairie. Her dark hair blew slightly in the morning wind, and her eyes, sharp and observant, seemed to notice everything. The trees, the animals, the gentle curves of the earth beneath her horse's hooves. There was no fear in her posture, no hesitation, only a calm awareness that she belonged wherever she was, even in a place as remote and wild as Eli's ranch. For a long moment, Eli simply watched, leaning against the fence post. He had been raised to be polite, to offer help when it was needed, yet he had never encountered a situation like this. The woman had not called for help, she did not look lost, and yet she was here, riding across his land, moving as though she had known it all her life. Something inside him stirred, a mixture of caution and curiosity, the kind he had never felt in decades of solitude. He finally decided to approach, slowly walking toward her with hands visible and open, just in case. He had always been careful around strangers, and even more so now because there was a sense of mystery about her he couldn't place. When he was still a few yards away, he called out in his gentle voice, "Hello there! Are you lost?" The woman paused and turned her head. Her eyes met his, and for a moment Eli felt as though she could see right through him, straight into his thoughts. Then she smiled, a small, polite smile, and shook her head. "No," she said softly. Her voice was calm and steady, carrying across the prairie like a soft wind. I'm just traveling, I mean no harm. Eli nodded, feeling a little relieved, though a nervous energy ran through him. I'm Eli Thompson, he said, extending a hand in greeting. This is my ranch. You're welcome to stay for a bit if you need. He wasn't sure why he was offering, only that something about her presence made him want to be kind. She studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. I am Aeln, she replied. I will be grateful for water and a place to rest. There was no hesitation in her words, only quiet strength, and Eli felt a sense of respect for her immediately. It was rare to meet someone so composed, someone who carried herself with dignity even when she was in a place that was foreign and unfamiliar. Eli led her toward the small cabin, careful not to startle her horse. Aeln followed quietly, her movements precise and careful, as if she were aware of every step and every detail around her. She did not ask many questions, only observed, taking in the land, the animals, and Eli himself. Eli, meanwhile, felt a growing awareness that his life was about to change. He had spent so many years in quiet routine that the idea of sharing even a single day with someone felt both exciting and frightening. At the cabin, Eli brought out a bucket of water for the horse and another for Aeln. She drank slowly, nodding in thanks, her eyes scanning the horizon as though she were always ready for anything. Eli noticed that her horse was calm, obedient, and intelligent, responding to her slightest movements. He realized that this woman was not just confident. She was skilled, independent, and capable. In a way, she reminded him of the animals he had always loved, strong, aware, and graceful. Over the next few days, Aeln stayed on the ranch, moving among the animals with ease. Eli watched her closely, curious and cautious at the same time. She never interfered unnecessarily, but when she offered help, it was with a skill and understanding that Eli could not ignore. One morning, she showed him a better way to repair a fence post, using simple knots and small adjustments that made the structure stronger than before. Eli followed her instructions, surprised at how much easier the work became. You have a good eye, he said quietly, watching her tighten the rope with practiced hands. Aeln glanced up and smiled. The land teaches you, she said. You only need to listen. Eli realized that was true. He had always listened to the land, understood the animals, and followed routines, but Aeln seemed to notice things he had never seen. How the grass grew differently near the creek, how certain rocks indicated the best path for the cattle, how the wind shifted across the prairie. She brought a new perspective, and though he felt a little nervous at first, he also felt grateful. Their days settled into a rhythm. Mornings were for chores and inspection of the land. Afternoons were quiet, with Eli sometimes reading while Aeln worked nearby, occasionally offering a small comment about the plants or the animals. Evenings were spent by the fire, where Eli would cook simple meals while Aeln prepared herbs or cleaned the tools they had used. There was no rush, no pressure, only a slow, unfolding awareness that something meaningful was beginning. The neighbors began to notice the new presence on the ranch. Some came with curiosity, others with suspicion. They asked Eli questions, trying to understand who Aeln was and why she was there. Eli answered carefully, explaining that she was a traveler who needed a place to rest, but he noticed the whispers and sideways glances. He didn't mind, he had always been careful about other people's judgments, but he also felt a quiet pride. Aeln had brought something new to the ranch, a presence that could not be ignored, and it reminded him that life could be larger than the routines he had followed for so long. One day, a storm approached. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, and the wind began to pick up, shaking the trees and stirring the grass into waves. Eli knew the cattle could be in danger if the storm hit with full force, and he began preparing the animals and securing the fences. Aeln helped without hesitation, moving quickly among the herds, guiding frightened cows to shelter, and calming the horses with gentle words and touches. Eli watched her, astonished at her courage and skill. When the storm arrived, it raged across the prairie with wind and rain, bending the grass and whipping against the cabin. Eli and Aeln worked side by side, making sure the animals were safe. For the first time in his life, Eli felt the power of partnership, not just with animals, but with a human being who understood the land as deeply as he did. The storm passed, leaving behind a quiet, wet calm, and Eli realized that Aeln's presence had changed the ranch in more ways than one. It was no longer just a place of solitude. It had become a place of shared effort and trust. Over the next few weeks, Eli began to notice more subtle changes in himself. He found himself speaking more easily, smiling more often, and even laughing quietly when Aeon said something unexpected or clever. He discovered that he looked forward to her presence, that her quiet strength inspired him, and that her calm confidence encouraged him to step beyond his usual boundaries. He began to take small risks he would never have considered before, trying new methods for tending the animals, exploring parts of the land he had never visited, and even planning small improvements to the cabin. Aeon, for her part, seemed to appreciate Eli's patience and gentleness. She did not interfere with his routines, but she added value quietly, teaching him about plants, herbs, and survival skills that had been passed down through her family. She never demanded recognition or praise. She simply shared what she knew, trusting Eli to observe and learn. Their interactions were marked by respect, subtle humor, and shared understanding. It was a slow, natural unfolding of friendship and connection, one that neither of them rushed or forced. At night, Eli often sat by the fireplace, reflecting on the events of the day. He thought about how much his life had changed in a short period, how a single presence could reshape even the most familiar landscape. He realized that Aeon had brought more than skill and knowledge. She had brought awareness, perspective, and a gentle challenge to his comfortable solitude. He began to understand that the land, which had always been his constant companion, was now shared, and that the quiet life he had once cherished could grow richer when experienced with another person. The town, too, began to accept the presence of Aeon, though cautiously. Some residents came to Eli's ranch, curious to meet the woman who had arrived without warning. She treated them with quiet dignity, answering questions politely, never boasting, and showing skill that earned their respect. Slowly, the whispers of suspicion turned to quiet admiration. Eli noticed this and felt a mix of relief and pride. He had always known that Aeon was remarkable, and now others were beginning to see it too. By the end of the season, the ranch had taken on a new energy. Fences were stronger, the herds were healthier, and Eli himself had grown in ways he had never imagined. He was more confident, more open to ideas, and more aware of the possibilities beyond the routines he had once followed so rigidly. And in the quiet moments, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of pink and gold, he felt something he had never truly known. Hope. Hope that life could be richer than solitude. Hope that connection, trust, and friendship could enter his world in unexpected ways. Hope that even a shy, quiet man like him could find companionship, understanding, and perhaps even love. And though he did not yet know what the future held, Eli felt ready to face it, step by step, side by side with Aeon, the mysterious woman who had quietly entered his life and changed it forever. The weeks passed, and the rhythm of life on the ranch shifted in subtle but profound ways. Eli Thompson had grown accustomed to Aeon's presence, and he realized that his once predictable life was no longer as quiet or solitary as it had been. He no longer spent hours alone in contemplation by the creek or by the barn. Instead, he found himself moving through the days with Aeon nearby, listening to her observations, learning from her skills, and slowly sharing pieces of himself he had long kept hidden. Aeon's knowledge of the land was remarkable. She understood the behavior of the animals in ways Eli had never considered. She noticed which cows were restless and why, which horses were uneasy and what would calm them, and even the subtle signs that indicated the approach of bad weather. Eli followed her example, watching carefully, and found that he began to notice details he had overlooked for years. He realized that Aeon's presence was not only teaching him practical skills, but also opening his eyes to the deeper rhythms of the prairie, the subtle patterns that connected every living thing to the land. One afternoon, as the sun beat down on the dry summer grass, Aeon suggested they check the northern pasture together. Eli mounted his horse while Aeon climbed onto hers, and they rode side by side, their horses moving easily over the gentle slopes. The air was warm, filled with the scent of wildflowers and dry earth, and the prairie stretched endlessly in every direction. Eli found himself talking more than he had in years, telling Aeon about his childhood, his father's lessons, and the routines he had followed to keep the ranch alive. Aeon listened quietly, nodding occasionally, but mostly she watched the land and the animals, her attention sharp and unwavering. "You know this land well," she said at last, her voice calm but firm. You understand it in ways most people never will. That is a gift." Eli felt a surge of gratitude. It was rare for anyone to notice his care, his patience, and his effort. Most people had always seen him as quiet, withdrawn, or strange. But Aeon, somehow, saw the value in his life, the depth of his connection to the land, and it gave him confidence he had never known. He realized that her presence had not only changed his routines, but also had begun to change the way he viewed himself. Over the following days, the bond between them deepened. They shared tasks as naturally as breathing. Aeon would show Eli how to identify edible herbs, how to mend broken harnesses quickly, and how to move quietly across the prairie to avoid startling the animals. Eli, in turn, shared his knowledge of the cattle, the horses, and the seasons, teaching Aeon about the delicate balance of grazing land, water sources, and shelter. They complemented each other perfectly, each learning from the other, each finding a rhythm that strengthened their partnership. But life on the ranch was not without its challenges. One morning, as they were tending to the herd near the creek, Eli noticed a disturbance among the cows. A young bull had become frightened by something in the brush and was running in circles, endangering the other animals. Eli acted quickly, moving to calm the herd, but it was Aeon who found the source of the trouble, a small pack of coyotes circling the edge of the trees. Without hesitation, she instructed Eli to guide the cattle toward the open meadow while she faced the coyotes, her voice and movements steady and commanding. Eli was amazed at her courage. The coyotes eventually retreated and the herd was safe. For the first time, Eli realized that he was no longer facing the dangers of the land alone. Aeon was a partner in every sense, capable, brave, and unafraid to act when needed. The event marked a turning point for Eli. He began to see Aeon not just as a visitor or helper, but as someone who had become essential to the life of the ranch. He felt a quiet warmth when she was near, a comfort in knowing that she could handle challenges he would have struggled with alone. At night, by the fire, he found himself thinking about her in ways he had never imagined he would think about another person. Aeon, too, seemed to appreciate their growing connection. She would smile at Eli when he found clever solutions to problems, offer gentle encouragement when he doubted himself, and occasionally share stories of her own past, tales of her family, her travels, and the lessons she had learned from the land. She spoke with honesty and clarity, never boasting, never demanding attention, but allowing Eli to see the depth of her experience. Together, they faced another challenge when a sudden drought struck the prairie. The grass dried quickly, the water levels in the creek dropped, and the animals became restless. Eli had faced dry seasons before, but with Aeon at his side, he found new solutions. They dug small trenches to redirect water, moved the cattle to areas with better grazing, and created temporary shelters for the horses. The work was exhausting, but Eli felt invigorated. The ranch, once a solitary place of labor, had become a shared space of problem-solving and cooperation. Through these trials, Eli began to change. He was more confident in his decisions, more willing to take risks, and more open to listening and learning. The fear and shyness that had always held him back were replaced by a quiet strength, a sense that he could face challenges and succeed with someone he trusted by his side. And more than that, he began to feel a sense of joy he had never experienced in his solitary life. The joy of shared effort, the comfort of companionship, and the subtle excitement of discovering what life could be beyond the routines he had known. Evenings became a time of reflection and quiet conversation. Eli and Aeon would sit by the fire, sharing small stories, laughter, and observations about the world around them. Eli discovered that he enjoyed talking about things he had never shared with anyone, memories of his father, dreams he had set aside, and his hopes for the ranch. Aeon listened with patience and understanding, never judging, never interrupting, only offering gentle insights or asking thoughtful questions that encouraged him to see things in new ways. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Eli realized that he had come to rely on Aeon not just for her skill and knowledge, but for her presence. Her calm confidence had helped him grow, her perspective had broadened his understanding of the land, and her companionship had awakened emotions he had long buried. He felt a quiet gratitude, and for the first time in his life, he allowed himself to believe that he could have a future richer than the one he had imagined. As the months passed, Eli noticed that the land itself seemed to respond to their partnership. The cattle were healthier, the horses more spirited, and even the crops they had planted in a small garden flourished. Eli realized that their combined efforts were creating a balance he had never experienced alone. He felt a deep connection to Aeon, one that went beyond friendship or admiration, a connection rooted in trust, respect, and shared purpose. Aeon, too, began to show signs of trust and comfort. She no longer moved with only careful observation but with a sense of belonging. She laughed more easily, offered small jokes, and shared moments of quiet reflection. Eli noticed that her presence had a calming effect on him, making even difficult tasks feel manageable. The ranch had become a place of harmony, not just between man and land, but between two people who had found a way to work together, to support each other, and to create something stronger than either could have done alone. One morning, as they rode out to inspect the farthest pasture, Eli felt a sense of peace he had never known. The sun was warm, the wind gentle, and the prairie stretched endlessly around them. He glanced at Aeon, her eyes scanning the horizon, her posture calm and confident, and realized that he no longer feared the unknown. The world, which had once felt intimidating and vast, now seemed full of possibilities. With Aeon by his side, he could face challenges, explore new ideas, and embrace change without fear. Their bond continued to grow, shaped by shared experiences, mutual respect, and a quiet understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses. Eli no longer felt the sharp ache of loneliness. It had been replaced by a sense of partnership, a recognition that life could be richer and more meaningful when shared with someone who understood him and the world around him. And so, Eli Thompson, the shy rancher who had once lived a life defined by solitude, began to experience a transformation. He was no longer simply a man who tended his land and his animals. He was a man who had discovered the value of trust, the joy of shared labor, and the deep satisfaction of connection. Aeon, the skilled and independent woman who had entered his life unexpectedly, had changed everything, not through grand gestures or demands, but through quiet presence, competence, and the gentle power of partnership. By the end of that season, Eli looked across the prairie and saw a land that was alive, vibrant, and full of possibility. He looked at Aeon, working alongside him, and realized that his life had grown in ways he had never imagined. The shy, solitary man he had once been had been transformed, not by wealth, fame, or adventure, but by the presence of someone who understood him, the land, and the animals he cared for so deeply. For the first time in his life, Eli felt that his world was complete, not perfect, not without challenges, but full of promise, connection, and hope. And in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the grass and the sun dipped below the horizon, Eli allowed himself to feel something he had long denied: the warmth of companionship, the thrill of discovery, and the subtle beginnings of a love that neither words nor time could fully describe. Life on the ranch would never be the same, and for Eli Thompson, that was a gift he would cherish forever. The prairie had grown quiet in the early morning, the sun rising slowly over the distant hills, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. Eli Thompson sat on his porch, sipping coffee, listening to the gentle sounds of his ranch awakening. The cattle were lowing softly, the horses nickered to one another, and the wind moved through the tall grass in soothing waves. He had long grown used to the rhythm of the land, but now it felt different, fuller, warmer, as if the prairie itself recognized the changes that had taken place in his life. Aeon emerged from the barn, carrying a small basket of eggs and some herbs she had collected from the garden. Her presence was steady, calm, and full of quiet strength. Eli watched her for a moment, appreciating the way she moved with ease across the porch, carrying the weight of her tasks without effort. He realized that in the months she had been with him, she had become more than a visitor or helper. She had become part of the rhythm of his life, inseparable from the land he loved so dearly. "Good morning," Aeon said softly, setting the basket down on the table. She smiled, and Eli felt a warmth in his chest that he had never known before. "Good morning," he replied, standing to pour her a cup of coffee. "Sleep well?" "Yes," she said simply. "The land is peaceful at night, and so is your home." "I sleep well here." Her words carried a quiet honesty that struck Eli deeply. She did not offer flattery or praise. She spoke truthfully, and that made her presence feel genuine, grounding, and rare. The day began with routine chores, but the work felt different now. Eli no longer moved through the tasks alone. He worked in tandem with Aeon, their actions smooth and synchronized. She guided the cattle gently to better grazing areas, while Eli inspected fences and repaired weak spots. Their partnership had grown natural, intuitive. There were no long discussions needed. Each understood the other's movements, anticipating needs, filling gaps. What had once been laborious and solitary was now shared, vibrant, and full of quiet satisfaction. By mid-morning, Eli suggested they explore a new part of the land together, a section of the prairie he had always avoided because it was rocky and difficult to navigate. "I've never spent much time over there," he admitted, "but I think it could be good grazing land for the cattle." Aeon looked toward the rocky hills with interest. "It will be challenging," she said, "but the land will reward care. Shall we go?" They rode together, horses moving steadily over the uneven terrain. Eli felt a thrill of excitement he had never experienced on these lands before, a sense of adventure tempered by the calm confidence that Aeon brought. She pointed out safe paths, soft grasses, and hidden water sources, teaching him to see patterns he had overlooked for years. He listened intently, absorbing every detail, and found that he no longer felt shy or hesitant. With Aeon beside him, he felt capable of facing any challenge the land might present. As they reached the top of a small hill, Eli paused, taking in the sweeping view of the prairie. The land stretched endlessly, dotted with grazing cattle, clusters of trees, and the winding creek glinting in the sunlight. He realized in that moment that his life had been transformed. The ranch was no longer a place of solitude and routine. It had become a space of growth, partnership, and possibility, and at the heart of that transformation was Aeon. "You've taught me so much," he said quietly, glancing at her. "Not just about the land, but about life. About trust, about seeing what's possible." Aeon smiled, a faint blush on her cheeks. "You had it in you already," she said. "I only helped you see it." Eli felt a deep gratitude for her words. For the first time in his life, he realized that connection and companionship were not threats to his independence, but enrichments to it. The quiet, steady life he had once clung to could now be shared, made richer by mutual respect, understanding, and the bond they had forged. The following weeks brought new challenges that tested their skills and trust in one another. A sudden summer fire broke out in the dry grasses near the southern pasture. Smoke billowed into the sky, and the distant lowing of panicked cattle reached their ears. Eli acted quickly, moving to gather the herd, while Aeon guided the horses and helped clear paths to safety. The fire spread fast, but their combined efforts contained it, saving the animals and much of the pasture. Eli realized with awe that he would have struggled alone. Aeon's presence had not only changed his work, but had changed him. He was braver, more capable, and more resourceful than he had ever imagined. After the fire, they worked tirelessly to repair fences, tend to injured animals, and restore the grazing areas. The townspeople, who had once watched the ranch with quiet curiosity and suspicion, began to see the value of Aeon's presence. Some came to help, offering tools, labor, or advice. Eli felt a quiet pride, knowing that what he had built with Aeon was not just a home for the animals, but a place of community, trust, and resilience. As autumn approached, the land transformed again. The grasses turned amber, the leaves of distant trees blazed in fiery colors, and the nights grew cooler. Eli and Aeon worked together to prepare the ranch for winter, storing hay, reinforcing shelters, and making sure the animals would be safe from snow and cold. Through it all, Eli felt a growing sense of contentment. The ranch had become a living, breathing space of partnership, shared labor, and mutual respect. And through every task, every challenge, every quiet moment, he felt the bond between him and Aeon deepening. One evening, as the sun set and the prairie was bathed in golden light, Eli and Aeon sat together on a small hill overlooking the ranch. The animals grazed quietly below, and the wind carried a gentle scent of wildflowers and earth. For a long time, neither spoke, simply taking in the beauty of the land and the comfort of one another's presence. Finally, Eli broke the silence. "I never imagined my life could feel like this," he said softly. "I thought I would always be alone, tied only to the land and the animals. But now it feels full, alive, and ready for more, and it's because of you." Aeon looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light of the sun. "You brought me here too," she said quietly. I've seen more than I imagined I would, and I've learned from you as much as you have from me. We make each other stronger." Eli reached out, taking her hand gently in his. There was no rush, no words needed beyond the touch, only a quiet understanding that they had become essential parts of each other's lives. For the first time, Eli allowed himself to believe in the possibility of lasting companionship, a life shared with someone who understood him, respected him, and inspired him to grow. The winter arrived slowly, blanketing the prairie in soft snow. The ranch, prepared and fortified, weathered the season well. Eli and Aelin worked together to ensure the animals were safe and warm, and evenings by the fire became their time to reflect, plan, and share stories. They spoke of the future, of dreams for the ranch, and of the lives they wanted to build together. Eli realized that the quiet, shy man who had once feared connection was now full of hope, courage, and joy. Spring returned, bringing new life to the prairie. Calves were born, foals pranced beside their mothers, and the garden they had planted together began to flourish. The land itself seemed to celebrate their partnership, vibrant and alive in a way that mirrored the changes in their lives. Eli watched Aelin working among the animals, guiding them with skill and patience, and felt a profound gratitude. She had entered his world quietly, without demand or expectation, and yet had transformed it completely. By the end of the season, the ranch had become a place of balance, harmony, and growth. Eli no longer feared the unknown or the challenges of the land. He had discovered courage, skill, and the deep satisfaction of shared effort. And most importantly, he had discovered connection, an understanding and love that was quiet, steady, and enduring. One early morning, Eli and Aelin rode together across the prairie, their horses moving side by side, their eyes scanning the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the air crisp and filled with the scent of spring. Eli realized that life, once defined by solitude, had become something richer, warmer, and full of promise. Together they had built not only a ranch but a life, one of trust, companionship, and shared purpose. As they reached the top of a hill, Eli stopped and looked at the land below. It was vast, wild, and beautiful, a reflection of all they had faced and achieved together. He glanced at Aelin, her eyes bright with the morning light, and knew that his world had been forever changed. The shy rancher who had once lived a life of quiet routine had found courage, partnership, and love in the most unexpected way. And so, life continued on the prairie. The ranch flourished under their care, the animals thrived, and Eli and Aelin faced each new day together. Their lives were not perfect, for the land and its challenges were ever present, but they had discovered something far more valuable than perfection, a shared life built with respect, trust, and quiet love. And in the heart of the prairie, beneath the endless sky, Eli Thompson finally understood the true meaning of companionship, courage, and hope.